And I'd like to ask if someone, David, could you, when you see that the James is about finished, if you could go down and regather the children and come back up. Well, again, Brother James Robato is speaking to us this morning, and his subject is Stones of Remembrance, and he's asked that we read Joshua chapter 3. Joshua chapter 3. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. And it came to pass, after 3 days, that the officers went through the host, and they commanded the people, saying, When ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then ye shall remove from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. And Joshua said unto the people, Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua spake unto the priests, saying, Take up the ark of the covenant, and pass over before the people. And they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. And the Lord said unto Joshua, This day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. And thou shalt command the priests that bear the ark of the covenant, saying, When ye are come to the brink of the water of Jordan, ye shall stand still in Jordan. And Joshua said unto the children of Israel, Come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, Hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites, and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passeth over before you into Jordan. Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon an heap. And it came to pass, when the people were removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon an heap very far from the city Adam, that is, beside Zaratan. And those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off. And the people passed over against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan. And all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. So let's give our attention now to Brother James Robato on his subject, Stones of Remembrance.
Good morning. How's that volume for everybody? Is that good? Is that all right? I know I could get a little loud, but okay, stones of remembrance. Again, I said yesterday that sort of in general, you want to up higher? All right. Oh, gotcha. See, you guys are way more technical than we are back home. We have to lower it and raise it depending on the volume. So I was just saying that for the two talks, one last night and this morning, the sort of overall theme was these reminders, things that are there for us to help us in grounding us and making us remember who we're serving and why we're serving. And so this morning I want to focus on this idea of stones of remembrance. So there was a guy named John who had a really bad memory. It was pretty horrible. And one day he ran into a friend that he hadn't seen in a long time, and he said hello and said, "Bill, do you remember what a bad memory I had?" Bill answered, "Yeah, I certainly do." "Well, it's not bad anymore," John proclaimed. "I went to this seminar, and they taught us how to remember things. It was a great seminar, and now I have a wonderful memory." So Bill answered and said, "That's great. What was the name of the seminar?" "Well," said John, "wait a minute. My wife went with me. I'll ask her." So he turned, he saw his wife nearby, and then he turned back to Bill and he said, "Hey, Bill, what's the name of that flower with a long stem and thorns and a red bloom?" Bill said, "Do you mean a rose?" "Yeah, thanks. Hey, Rose, what was the name of that seminar that we went to?" You know, it wasn't until recently that scientists really kind of figured out that the brain, how it works when it comes to memory. I think they thought at one point that it was that in your brain there was one part that stored memories, almost like a warehouse full of rows and rows of neatly ordered cabinets, you know, and you could just pull the file cabinets out when you wanted to remember something. But they realize now that memories are not stored in one part of the brain. Rather, the brain stores memories like a maze of twists and turns. And each time a particular memory is recalled, the twists and turns rearrange themselves to bring that particular memory into focus. So it is impossible to say which part of the brain stores memories, as the whole brain stores memories. The whole brain rearranges the electrical impulses running through it into a particular pattern when it recalls a memory. The brain is not a computer. So if you want to think about it, like on your computer, you got folders, and you click into a folder and boom, you get some information. But it depends on several brain systems working in concert across many levels of neural organization. Now, just so you guys know, this kind of stuff is way above my pay grade, right? I'm giving you simple, because that's how I work. So when God designed the memory function in our brains, he created two complementary processes. The first process was learning something new, and the second was later on recalling the experience that we had just learned. And as we all know, memory is not impeccable. In fact, it is very unreliable. We tend to perceive and remember only what we consider as novel or important. And the rest sometimes is dumped and forgotten, right? And sometimes our memories, we recall things differently than they actually happened. You know, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but maybe you're in a group of friends and somebody's recalling a story. And as they're recalling that story, you're thinking in your head, that wasn't you, that was me. You know, and you have a circle of friends, you know what I mean? And you share experiences, and they almost become part of what you think was your memory and was you, but it was really somebody else, right? So these things can be a little unreliable. So knowing this, as humans, over the course of time, we create memorials to serve as a focus for the memory or commemoration of something. Usually, an influential or deceased person, a historical event, a great tragedy. They evoke feelings, mental pictures, reminders of those events, those people, the things that happened. And popular forms of these things are landmark objects, works of art, sculptures, statues, fountains, parks. this is sort of an area in the nation where it's very rich with memorials. And the National Park Service has a ton of memorials affiliated with it. They celebrate presidents, historical figures, wars, natural disasters, and early exploration. So there's a lot of memorials that exist, especially in this area. There's a high concentration here in the sort of Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. And if I were to pop up some pictures, you probably would see them and know what they are. They're very familiar. And they would recall a certain person or events, right? The Washington Monument on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. We all probably know that it commemorates the nation's first president, George Washington. On the side, it also happens to be the world's tallest predominantly stone structure made of marble, granite, and bluestone gneiss, and it stands about 555 feet. The interesting thing is, we know who George Washington is. The city was named after him. And when you look at George Washington, you realize what a great historical figure he was in our nation's past. And there's just two quick things I want to draw your attention to. And one is just realizing that I made a couple tweaks to this morning, and they didn't make this version. But that's okay. We'll go off of memory. So the first is he was a general, right? Before he was president, he was a general. I didn't know this. I looked it up. Apparently, he actually lost more battles than he won, but he was very courageous in battle. And there was one story where his soldiers were losing. They were losing the front lines, and George Washington rode up on his horse to establish that front line again. And he had 2 horses shot out from underneath of him, and he had 4, after the battle, he had 4 bullet holes in his coat. Very courageous man in battle. And one of the things that he's most famous for, this is where I wish I had the quote, but I'll just go, is his humility. He was this great general, and at the end of the war, he went to Congress and surrendered his authority in the military back to Congress, which basically the idea of that is he surrendered military control back to Congress, back to the people. He wasn't going to be, an Alexander the Great or somebody who then took that power and rode it, for the rest of his life. He did the same thing as president. When he became president, there was no term limits. He could have served as long as he wanted. He was the only president in the United States history that was voted unanimously. Not one vote against, not one vote for somebody else. He was a unanimous choice for president. And he chose, at the end of his second term, to walk away. And that actually then became a bit of a custom, and now it's law, right? 2 terms. This is one that I think is very, it's actually one of the most famous memorials in Washington, D.C. Very controversial when it was put in. I'm not sure if you all remember, I don't because I wasn't born, but when this was commissioned out as a design competition, 1,400 submissions, and a young woman in college won that competition, Maya Lin, who at the time in our nation's history may not have won that competition if they knew who she was. Very controversial that she was Asian American. And she had this very simple idea of creating these 2 walls that measure 246 feet long, polished black granite with the names of the servicemen etched into them. The wall descends from 8 inches down to about 10 feet at the highest point. And the whole idea is when you look at this, it was this sort of representative of a wound that the nation had incurred and that was healing over. And the whole idea, and you could see it in this picture, was that it was all about the people. So when you come and look at this, the reflective, polished nature of that granite, and the rough etched names, those names just stand out. It was all about the names. Very controversial, but symbolically, again, a wound that is closed and healing. One wall points towards the Washington Monument, one wall points towards the Lincoln Memorial. And when you go there and experience this memorial, it's very somber. The feeling that you get when you walk and descend down and look at those names is one of very quiet, reflective nature. Another one, similarly, up in New York City, kind of closer to home, the 9/11 Memorial, which recalls the tragic event that took place in 2001. And the memorial itself, if you ever have been there, is very overwhelming. And I think it speaks to the feeling that the nation had regarding the tragedy, an incredibly somber moment in history. The two footprints of the Twin Towers form the focal point of this memorial, with the largest man-made waterfalls in the U.S. cascading down into a reflecting pool. And it's set among 16 acres where there are over 400 trees that form a grove around this that represent the sort of spirit of hope and renewal. And when I think about this memorial, for me, it's a little more personal because I was alive when the event happened that it's memorializing. And when you see and visit this memorial, when you see the images on TV, if you search it up on the internet, you really can remember where you were when that happened. Those images, that memorial evokes that, like, wow, I know exactly where I was when I found out that happened. I happened to be in college. I was in my design studio, and I remember what they were playing on the radio. I remember everything. And memorials are this powerful tool that stimulate our memories of past events so that we can recall them and understand them, remember them, and give us that feeling. Just another one in Berlin. I was actually in this one years ago when I was in Germany. This Jewish museum really acts essentially as an architectural memorial of the Holocaust and brilliantly captures the element of remembrance through subtle and bold expressions in the architecture. I could go into this one because I love design, but I won't too much. But here was the most incredible part of this memorial. Daniel Libeskind designed this based on a straight line and then a crisscrossing lines that went across it. And what that essentially did was, in the building, it created these voids, these visible voids where they became empty spaces. And in the bottom of these voids were these metal faces. And the whole idea is that those void spaces represent the feeling that Germans have of a loss of their society, that there's a whole lot of people that aren't there, that should have been. And it's very powerful because as you're walking through this memorial and you're seeing these exhibits, you just pass by these voids. And you look and wow, what is that? And then you look out and it's very somber, it's very reflective. I'm not really going to say anything about this one, but I really do like this one. This one's close to the area too. This is an Air Force memorial, and the idea is like when the planes go up and they leave those trails, that's kind of what that is. But just as we've briefly mentioned, memorials are meant to call a specific event or person to remembrance. And as people, we see in this country how vast they're used. It ensures that moments in time and people in history are not lost and forgotten. And we see how prevalent they are in our culture, in our society, and throughout the world. So why did God design our brains in such a way that memories could be forgotten? Even when they are forgotten temporarily. You know, how many times you walk into a room and it's like, why did I walk into this room? What was I here again for? Right? How many times that you are going on a trip and you're like, okay, did I pack everything? I know I'm forgetting something. And about 8 hours into the trip, you're like, yep, that's what I forgot. Wish I had it. Wouldn't it have been better if God created our memories to stay permanently with us? And we would never forget. We don't need memorials. We would just always remember everything. Wouldn't that be better, don't you think? Well, apparently there was a case in Argentina in the late 1800s where a young man fell off a horse and was from then on unable to forget any experience that he had. So as an example, he knew by heart the forms of the southern clouds at dawn on the 30th of April, 1882, and could compare them in his memory with the mottled streaks which looked like clouds on the cover of a book he had seen only once. So for this poor man, he was driven almost to the point of insanity with his inability to forget everything that he experienced. All these experiences kept on accumulating on top of each other, never being forgotten to the point where it became completely intolerable for him. So that is why God designed us to forget things. and to need a reminder to bring them back into sharp focus. Isn't that pretty amazing? Pretty cool? Again, I'm not expert at this kind of stuff. I'm 101, right? So God creates us with the ability to forget things and sets about a stage in which he can create a series of reminders for us, a series of memorials that will establish and serve as a reminder of a specific event. He realizes that we often forget what he's done for us. And in Deuteronomy 6:12, Moses issues a final warning to Israel. And he says, "Be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." The Hebrew meaning of the word memorial is to remember. So given man's propensity to forget, it is little wonder then that memorials have frequently played an important role in biblical history. And it's something that we find very common. Once we open the pages of Scripture, there are littered with memorials. And Brother Joe was just telling me as I was about to come up here, turned around and said, I did a whole series of classes on all the memorials in the Bible. I was like, oh, great. Hopefully I don't get this one wrong, right? No, just kidding. So it's interesting, right, that he uses these. So here we have an account that we read in Joshua chapter 3. And I want to set the stage for that account and then look at chapter 4 briefly. Moses, who was the iconic leader of the people, who was with them in Egypt, led them out of that country, led them all through those 10 plagues, stood in front of the Red Sea, and with the power of God parted the waters so that the people could walk across on dry ground, brought them through the wilderness. He was the one who brought the 10 commandments down to the people. He had died. He had just died. And now Joshua was the one God chose as the servant tasked with taking the nation of Israel into the promised land. And one of the first things that occurs in his sort of charge is the sending out of the spies to view the land, and in particular the city of Jericho, which God promised Joshua he would deliver into their hands. We come across this in chapter 2, where we have the account of Rahab the harlot. And as a reminder, a whole generation of people had passed at this point. Since the crossing of the Red Sea, those who were enslaved in Egypt were no longer around. So the people that were left, the people that were about to go into the promised land, was a generation that didn't know the idols from Egypt. They were a generation that did not have a victim mentality that comes along with having been enslaved for 10 generations. This was a new generation of freed Israelites standing at the threshold of the promised land, ready to take their inheritance with a new leader at the helm. And it's interesting that before they could go take the city of Jericho, we see in chapter 3 that they first needed to cross the flooding Jordan River. And they had some very specific instructions on how this was going to occur. The priests were going to go ahead about a half mile in front with the Ark of the Covenant. And as soon as their feet touched the water of that river, it would stop flowing. A little bit different than the parting of the Red Sea. A flowing river. As soon as their feet touched it, it stopped flowing. You can imagine what was building up behind it, right? Dry land in front. And so a true miracle that the people witness. Really, for the first time, they see a miracle. This wasn't something that they had seen before. They weren't really around for the parting of the Red Sea, or they didn't remember it. They were so young. Like I mentioned last night, if they were me, they would have forgot everything up until they were 15. So here they are, not having experienced this kind of miracle, and they were going to take the city of Jericho in a very odd fashion. God's directions and instructions to the people of Israel to take that city wasn't going to be, and we're going to, hit it up with some cannons and rocket fire, and, because that's how you take down a city. It was more that they were going to walk around its walls and make some noise, and the walls were going to crumble down. Completely aside, I thought it was a great, great thought that a brother in Texas had just recently. I had always thought this, and I think we do this with our kids, right? And let's get the kids to do a great entertainment play, and they'll walk around the walls, and we'll give them a bunch of pots and pans, and they'll clang them and make all this noise, and then boom, the walls come down. So I always thought in my mind, yeah, they walked around the walls, and they made a bunch of noise, and then the walls came down. And this brother had a great point that, does that make sense? Is God sort of the God of chaos and noise? Or was their noise with the trumpets more a song of praise? And at the praise of God coming out of these people, the walls came down. I thought that was a brilliant, brilliant point. But again, the crossing of the Jordan River would act for them as a faith builder, so that when they were walking around those walls of Jericho, they could have confidence in God that, yes, He just brought us across the Jordan River. He stopped it. We walked on dry land. These walls will surely come down at His command. And so then we have Joshua chapter 4. What time am I supposed to stop? It's a serious question. In 20 minutes? Okay. I'm going to count on you to be my hook. Don't let me go over. Okay. So Joshua chapter 4. All the people had crossed safely over the Jordan River. Now it was time to go get Jericho, right? Well, not yet. Joshua chapter 4. When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight." Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan. Take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, that this may serve as a memorial among you, that you will never forget what just happened. That when your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean? You shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever." And if you keep reading down, Joshua actually does the same thing. They take 12 stones, they place them in the camp. He takes 12 stones and stacks them right where those feet of the priests were, right in the middle of the river, so that they would never forget. And that's what this whole chapter 4 is about. It's about God commanding Joshua, you got to have a reminder. We're a forgetful people. We need this memorial, especially for our children. So I've got behind up here, so we'll catch up. So what was the purpose? What was the purpose? It was a reminder of what God had done for them. Deuteronomy 4:9. Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from you all the days of your life. Psalm 143, verse 5. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you have done. I ponder the work of your hands. What was the reason for those stones? What else? The sharing of faith with future generations, your children. Again, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget these things. That same verse that we just read, if you keep reading on, it says, to make them known to your children and your children's children. So not only to serve as a reminder for you, but so that your children and their children will be reminded and know about this event and who worked this miracle. Philemon 1, 4-6. I thank my God always when I remember you in my prayers, because I hear of your love and of the faith that you have toward the Lord Jesus and for all the saints. And I pray the sharing of your faith may become effective for the full knowledge of every good thing that is in us for the sake of Christ. The third point, that it would be a signpost to the world. And later on in that chapter, verses 23 and 24, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. When they went into Jericho, had they heard about God before? Did they know what God had done? They knew. This signpost to the world. And lastly, it results in our praise to God for what he has done for us. Psalm 105, verses 1 through 2. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people. Sing to him, sing praises to him, tell of all his wondrous works. So God, as our creator, understands us so well that it would be beneficial for us to have memorials, these reminders so that we don't forget. Something to jog our memories. Something that, again, we see throughout the pages of Scripture. We see this in the rainbow. We see it in the Passover feast, in the ephod. All of this stuff had symbolic meaning so that they wouldn't forget certain things. You still see rainbows today. The Jewish people just celebrated the Passover feast. Still, however many thousands of years later, still thinking about those events that occurred. The priestly garments in Exodus. And then there's an interesting example of where somebody like David, a man after God's own heart, establishes memorials for himself in his life to remember what God has done for him. In 1 Samuel 17, we have the story of David and Goliath. And it's a very famous account. A lot of interesting things to bring up about it. But again, you kind of know what happens, right? There's no spoiler alert here. David wins. Yeah. But he does something very interesting after he slays the giant. When you're a kid, you might think it's great. He cut off his head, and you're like, yes, cut off his head. But he does something after that. After he carries the head to Jerusalem, which is it wouldn't happen today. He takes his armor and brings it into his tent. So David takes Goliath's armor and puts it in his tent. Why did David do that? Some have speculated that, under Philistine oppression, the Israelites didn't have any blacksmiths, so they couldn't create any weapons or armor or anything like that. So David saw the opportunity to take some good, war stuff and keep it for himself. But that doesn't make any sense, does it? Because whose armor did he not wear into battle? Saul's. David had no use for physical armor. But he was going to lead the people and be their king. And he was going to need a reminder of what God did for him that day in defeating Goliath. Because the battle was the Lord's, it wasn't David's. So as he grows, and as he has children of his own, he can take them and show them Goliath's armor and tell them the story, first-hand account of what happened. This gigantic man of war that defied the armies of the living God, this is his armor. God defeated him that day. So what are your stones? What are my stones? What memorials exist in my life that are helping remind me of how God is working? Memorials that I can use, stones of remembrance that I can use for my children and their children, so that I can share those stories of how God worked in my life. Powerful stories of how God was interested in my life, of how God worked in my life, how God is faithful in all that I do. So I'm going to open myself up here and I'm going to share two stones with you. And again, stones are different for everybody. And some of them, and I say this as a precursor, some of them are answered prayers in ways that we want. Some of them are answered prayers in ways that we don't want. And so stone number one, back in September 2014, we had a doctor's visit where the doctors sort of had some concern with Ruth Ann. And at the time, we didn't have insurance, and they wanted to take an MRI, so we had to wait until January of 2015 to get an MRI, which the results caused great concern with the doctors for her and her health. And over the course of several months, there were lots of tests, ultrasounds, with 3 biopsies, all of which couldn't tell anything conclusive, but the doctors were saying she's got some kind of cancer. We don't know at what stage, we don't know exactly what's going on, and we're going to need to perform surgery to figure out what is happening. So while all that was going on for Ruth Ann and I, it was a pretty surreal point in life. We had 3 little kids, and I remember very, very specifically sitting on our couch in our living room at night when the kids were sleeping, looking at each other and thinking, this is a new reality. We don't know what's going to happen. Praying to God that maybe it's early and we caught it early, and her concern, we have 3 little kids, what's going to happen? And it was a very, very surreal point in life. And I remember her going in for that surgery and then waiting. And the whole thing about the time that was the hardest was just the waiting in the unknown. And a few days before the surgery, and this was not something I typically had done, but I was just thinking as I was working from home, I was just thinking about, in James 5, it says the prayer of the faith can save. So I got out my phone and I texted 5 of my closest friends, and I remember asking them very specifically to pray for Ruth Ann, that I believed that God could take this away from her if he wanted. He absolutely, in his power, could totally do that. But it was his will. And so those 5 friends of ours prayed very earnestly for us. And I remember driving home, and we had a good friend that was with Ruth Ann as I was driving home, waiting for the results of that. And I remember getting a call about 10 minutes from home saying that no cancer, that everything that they thought it wasn't. And in my mind, that prayer was answered. Those 5 friends I'm eternally grateful for. And that is something that we will share with our children because we feel that God intervened in our lives in that case. Another stone. So in about 2016, Ruth Ann and I got to give a little background to this stone, but Ruth Ann and I started considering adoption. It was something that had come to both of us separately. This sort of overwhelming feeling of grace and love as we considered how we have been adopted into God's family. And that was sort of becoming this very overwhelming feeling for us of this love that God had for us, that he would take us into his family. And as our family grew, we thought about all the other families in the world. We thought about all the other kids in the world. And it became very clear there's a lot of kids that don't have families. And I became shocked after looking into it how many that number is. I mean, that number worldwide is almost countless. They almost can't know because not every child has paperwork. But it's in the millions and potentially hundreds of millions of kids that just don't have both mom and dad. So we began exploring international adoption, and then our eyes were really open to our own country, our own backyard, that, hey, there's people like right in the next city that need families. There are 400,000 kids in the foster care system in the United States. In our first world country, 400,000 kids that do not have families. So we started the foster process with training in 2018, and after getting through all the paperwork, our home was licensed in the fall of 2018, and our plan, because we had a plan, God has a different plan, but we had a plan, and our plan was, okay, we have 2 girls, they share 1 room, we have another bedroom with 1 boy in it, we can get bunk beds, we'll get a boy, and that'll work out perfect. We have 3 bedrooms in our house. And that was our idea. Then we got a call for a baby girl who had been abandoned in the hospital. They said, would you take her? We looked at each other, we prayed, and we were like, yeah, how can we not? How can we say no? Well, it wasn't an immediate thing because she was in the hospital and she had some severe issues that she was dealing with. And so it was over the course of 2 months that we really didn't hear anything. We had a call for another boy. That didn't work out. And we remember just wondering, like, what is going on? We're not getting any information. And we got that call, I believe, in October-ish, September. That call initially, somewhere in like obviously it wasn't September. It was end of October, November, right? So we're driving up to Canada for the holidays, and we had really kind of been a little casual about the whole process. But as we were driving up to Canada, we were talking a little bit about this girl who had been abandoned at the hospital, and we were just thinking, we can't be passive about this anymore. Like, what is going on? We need to find out. And as we're having this conversation, this song comes on the radio, and we're thinking about how, man, she's all alone in the hospital. Like, nobody's holding her. It's so important for babies to be held. And this song comes on, and part of the song goes like this. She's all alone tonight. There's nothing I could do to make it right. Is it ever going to be? Is it ever going to be brighter? Is it ever going to be easier? Hold her tonight. Oh God, would you hold her tonight? Because I'm not there to stay close. Keep watch. Tell her she's not alone. Hold her tonight. That became this prayer of ours that we took up. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, it really intensified. And we got back from Canada, and on January 4th, we got a call that she's ready to be picked up. So we go and we get her. And along with her comes all these doctor visits and all these things that go on. And so Ruth Ann takes her to all these appointments. And over the next several months, somewhere, I don't know, I'll get the time frame wrong. I'm going to say March or April. Ruth Ann, you can correct me later. But Ruth Ann brings her to an appointment where she meets a bunch of the nurses from the hospital who had cared for Lily. And we come to find out that there was one nurse in particular who just felt this special love and affinity for Lily and would consistently stay with her and hold her and cuddle her in the hospital every night that she was there, every shift that she was on. And at one point, she even said that she would have, if she could have herself adopted her, she would have liked to. And hearing that was just nothing short of amazing. Hearing that was nothing short of an answered prayer from God that this little girl that we took had been loved, that somebody had been there for her, that she wasn't alone. So I would implore you, as we consider what God has done for each and every one of us in our lives, to think about those stones of remembrance that you have in your life, to share them with each other. We have a tendency in this culture not to want to share those things. I'm not really sure why, but let's get over that. Let's share these things. It helps others, especially our children. And the interesting thing is when you think about stones of remembrance, what is God's memorial name, right? Yahweh. Well, isn't he building a memorial as well? Out of you and I, a spiritual house with a cornerstone. In 1 Peter, it says, as you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. 1 Peter 2:6 says, for it stands in Scripture, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. 1 Corinthians 10:4 describes him as the spiritual rock. We have a memorial that God has set up for us to consider every week. The breaking of bread that reminds us of Jesus' sacrifice, so that we might not forget what was done for us, that we wouldn't forget the love that this man showed us when he sacrificed himself on that cross, willingly, despising the shame. And we need this week in and week out because we're forgetful. We need this to bring to clarity the memory of our Lord, to bring to reality the memory of our Lord, so that it's not fuzzy, so that we don't forget. What time did I have to? 2 minutes? Okay. So we'll skip. I'll just plant this for your thoughts. You can continue what I was going to say in your minds. Jesus leaves us a memorial, not only in his body, but the table. I want you to consider when he went into that upper room with his disciples to eat with his disciples at that table. I want you to consider who he ate it with. The disciples, including Judas. And that whole conversation that occurs in that upper room around that table was about someone's going to betray me. But what it was about was someone's going to betray me, but all of you around this table, you're all sinners and in need of this sacrifice that I'm about to partake of. Judas, you including. And when you come to a table, I want you to think about your tables at home. When you sit around the table, you have conversations at dinner. Don't those things become special? It's where you share family time. You share memories. You talk about those stones of remembrance that you have, this table. And there's significance to those tables of ours. And I'm just going to quickly read this for you, and then I'll leave you with two thoughts. I was talking to somebody recently who was considering buying a new dining room table, and this was their thoughts. After countless meals together, often shared with family and friends, that table had become an icon of God's grace and goodness. To take up a place at that table was to occupy sacred space. The people we loved most sat with us there. Meals were shared. Stories were told. Sins were confessed. We laughed together and cried together. Together we remembered where we'd been. We dreamed of where we might be going. We prayed at that table, and there we experienced God's nearness, God's kindness, and God's love. Jesus says to his disciples, right before he was about to go away, hey, come, let's go sit at the table. Let's share a meal together with his closest friends. And he gives them this reminder. And this table really becomes, to Judas especially, and he didn't accept it, but to all of the other disciples, that there is grace. That although you are a sinner, that although you don't deserve it, grace is at this table. I am willing to die and put my life up for you. And so he brings and shares that with us in this idea of come to the table. Come to the table. That's where you can be afforded grace. So this table of remembrance is his body and his blood, all of that sacrifice that we talk about, but it's the table too in itself and what it represents in being a token of grace for us. So I pray that this was of some help to all of us when we consider how God is working with each and every one of us and how we need to share that with each other. And we pray that those stones of remembrance may build our faith and our children's faith until he comes. Thank you.